The end of peace. The cold black eyes of the dead man at the camp's entrance should have been the first warning. Perhaps even the withered crops they'd ridden past should have set off alarms in his head. But it wasn't until Ghalen saw the soldiers, really saw them, that he understood. Even to his untrained eyes, these men had not been fighting mere Elgaric raiding parties. He sought his father's gaze for reassurance, the way he always did when fear crept in. But the older man stared straight ahead, jaw set, more distant than Ghalen had ever seen him.
"You need to learn about real battles, real hardship,"
his father had said when forcing him to come.
Yet now, that hardship surrounded them. The man who usually offered reassurance had withdrawn completely.
Ghalen shifted in the saddle, his muscles stiff with unease as he followed in silence through the crowded camp. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and metal. It churned in his stomach. This was nothing like the glorious battle preparations he had read about in the royal archives. Reality was far grimmer. Men with haunted eyes and blood-stained bandages moved past him without a word. He fingered the small journal hidden inside his tunic, already composing in his mind how he would record this contrast between heroic ballads and brutal truth. As his father passed, each man saluted or bowed, their chainmail glinting in the dim light. Riding a step behind, Ghalen mimicked his father's curt nods, though no one spared him more than a passing glance. Tents and crates clogged up the camp, leaving narrow pathways. Ghalen worried his father's stallion might not fit through the tighter gaps. His father finally broke the silence with a muttered curse.
"I'll have to lead the damned horse if it gets any more crowded."
He turned in the saddle, offering Ghalen a wry smile.
"Would have made your grandmother proud, wouldn't it?"
Ghalen returned the smile and nodded. He always loved his grandmother, though she had been a stickler for etiquette. Upon reaching their destination, his father dismounted with practiced ease, his boots sinking into the mud as he patted the stallion's neck. Ghalen followed suit, landing awkwardly in the uneven ground. Clutching his satchel of quills and parchment, he stumbled after his father toward the advisor's tent on the camp's eastern edge.
Galen's older cousin, Cedric, strode over with a confident grin to meet them.
"Good to see you, Uncle," he said before turning to Ghalen. "And you too, cousin. 19's well beyond the age to stop hiding behind books and start seeing the world with your own eyes, eh?" Ghalen forced a polite smile, though his stomach soured. They all wanted him to become one of them, molded in the same shape as his brothers, perfect warriors with bloodied sword and calloused hands. But Ghalen had no desire to join their ranks. In his eyes, the world had more than enough men eager to swing blades and shout orders. Let them have their battles. He would play the dutiful son, nod where expected, endure the mud and bravado. But his true purpose lay elsewhere, in watching, remembering, and one day writing the history of it all.
Cedric clapped Ghalen on the shoulder with a wink,
then moved to take reins of their horses, leading them toward a makeshift stable. The muffled sound of raised voices reached Ghalen before he arrived at the tent. Another heated debate.
He trailed behind his father, who pressed forward at a brisk pace despite the biting Ilskar winds seeping through every layer of clothing. Ghalen tightened his cloak, wishing they were anywhere but here. Flickering torchlight cast restless shadows on the tent's fabric walls, offering fleeting glimpses of the animated figures inside. A guard stationed outside the tent straightened at their approach and saluted. Ghalen shrank back as a guard announced in a booming voice, "High King Begram Whitmore of Arania." The tent flap was flung open, and Ghalen slipped in behind his father. His presence barely acknowledged amidst the tension in the room. Inside, the weight of authority pressed down on Ghalen like an iron cloak. His eyes darted across the figures gathered before him. First, the Lord Marshal of Ilskar, broad-shouldered and imposing, seemed to fill half the space with his iron-clad presence. Beside him stood the spiritual leader from Keld, radiating a serene calm in teal garments that shimmered in the firelight. Her piercing blue eyes were so striking that Ghalen had to look away. And further back, looming near the shadows, was a Gwelhir ranger, a towering half-elf with fiery orange hair cascading down his back, his pointed ears twitching as if attuned to every sound. The room fell silent as Begram stepped forward, and a unified murmur of, "My king," rippled through the gathered crowd. Ghalen lingered near the entrance, gripping the strap of his satchel like a lifeline. Begram raised a hand in acknowledgement, his commanding presence unmistakable as he strode to the center of the tent. There were no pleasantries, no time for formalities. Begram seated himself on a modest wooden throne at the far end of the room. He wasted no time.
I thought we sent the army to protect the border from raiding parties. The men outside look like they've seen far more than that, and the dead bodies outside the camp. What is happening here? I need the latest reports. Now.
The Lord Marshal was the first to speak, his deep commanding voice slicing through the tense silence.
My king, your sons have led the forces here well, but the attacks were far larger than our initial estimates. Our troops faced fierce resistance. It appears the Elgric are amassing for another assault. They leave nothing but death and ruin in their wake. There have been no attempts at diplomacy. Their purpose, it seems, is solely to destroy.
Ghalen flinched at the mention of his brothers. Of course they were leading the charge. He tried to focus, committing every word to memory for the history books. But one phrase stood out to him. Solely to destroy. He read of them, an insular people known for their woodwork and disinterest in diplomacy. In every account he could recall, they were peaceful. The well-here ranger stepped forward, his fiery orange hair shimmering in the torchlight like molten metal. Our rangers have tried to approach their borders, he said, his voice measured and calm. But the Elgric have fortified them heavily. The paths we once used for contact are closed, and many have died attempting to cross. It's too dangerous to venture into their lands now. Ghalen felt a lump in his throat. Many have died. He cast a sidelong glance at his father, searching for some flicker of emotion. But Begrim's face was a mask of stoic determination. How does he remain so composed? Ghalen wondered. He felt like an intruder in this grim council, safe within the confines of the tent, while others spoke of death and destruction. The cleric stepped into the light next, her teal robes shimmering in the flickering torchlight. The troubled lines etched on her face deepened the dread pooling in Galen's chest. My liege, she began, her voice taut with unease. They wield magic unlike anything we've seen. It seeps into the earth, turning fields to ash and rivers foul. Crops wither overnight. We find livestock bloated and blackened, as if the land itself rejects life. She paused, eyes flickering toward the restless tent flaps where the wind tugged and howled. In some reports, soldiers claim they raised the dead. The corpses outside died on the corrupted fields. Their bodies reacted to the taint. We plan to burn them to prevent further spread. The Ma must forgive us for not following funeral rites, but our healers are powerless against such darkness. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Whatever has twisted their minds must also fuel this evil. Ghalen watched his father's jaw tighten with each report, the lines on his face deepening as if the weight of the world has settled there. Begrim sprang up, pacing the confined space of the tent. His heavy boots squelched against the muddy ground. My mother orchestrated the largest military alliance in our continent's history. After nearly 60 years of peace, we're now under attack from the Elgric. These peaceful nomads, corrupted by death magic? Ghalen was stunned to hear the rare vulnerability in his father's tone. Begrim paused, then sank back into his throne. He pressed his forehead into his palm, his broad shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. Galen's heart ached at the sight. His father had always been unshakable, a towering figure of strength and certainty. Grandmother had promised that his father would be the first king to rule in peace. Now, that promise felt like a cruel, unattainable dream. A sixth sense of despair churned in Galen's stomach. Begrim straightened slowly, his voice hardening once more as he turned to the Lord Marshal. The Elgric have never involved themselves in our conflicts or shown the slightest interest in our politics. Yet, I trust we've been monitoring their military capabilities, for precaution, if nothing else. The Lord Marshal opened his mouth, his brow furrowing as though preparing to protest. But something in the king's tone must have silenced him. Instead, his gaze shifted to the ranger, a tacit handoff of responsibility. The elf nodded, his expression sharp as he spoke. Indeed, my liege. The Lord Marshal instructed us to scout their military power, a prudent safety measure, no doubt. His tone measured, but Ghalen noticed a flicker of annoyance in his eyes as he glanced toward the marshal. Begrim shook his head, his face unreadable as he absorbed the information. Then tell me, he said, his voice low but firm. Do the Elgric, death magic or not, stand any chance against us in war? The Lord Marshal answered this time, his tone confident and steady, his composure regained. Not a chance, my king. Our weaponry is superior, and we outnumber them 5-1.
They have berserkers who fight amongst themselves in their eternal conflict, but no army trained for true warfare.
Before Ghalen could process the marshal's words, the sharp clang of bells pierced the air, followed by the sound of commotion outside the tent. The council fell silent, turning as one toward the source of the disturbance. A guard thrust his head through the tent flap, his voice taut with urgency. "My liege, the alarm! What are your orders?"
Begrim's jaw tightened. "Lord Marshal, ready the troops. The rest of us will remain here and await a report. We must know what we're dealing with before we act. Go, with Lumiere's light."
The Lord Marshal saluted and left with hurried steps, his boots squelching against the muddy ground outside. Before long, 2 guards burst into the tent, faces grim, hauling a wounded scout between them, his uniform dark with blood and body limp. Ghalen felt an icy dread as he took in the scout's dire state. The soldiers laid their burden before the council, and the scout's eyes found the king's. With a struggle that etched deeper lines of pain across his features, the scout delivered his message in a hoarse, muted whisper.
"They are here."
Those chilling words sparked an immediate flurry of activity from the council, and as Ghalen hurried after his father out of the tent, he could swear the alarm bells clanged more ominously. As the other leaders dashed to their respective stations, Begrim donned his armor and rallied his honor guard. Hurrying to keep pace, Ghalen followed his father as he emerged from the camp with his entourage. Already, the army was in motion. Archers, cavalry, and footmen formed tight ranks, prepared before the enemy host could breach the forest's edge. From the forest's edge, the fearsome figures of Elgaric soldiers emerged. Their tall, bearded forms, an imposing sight in battered leather armor, a far cry from the captain's polished chainmail and woven uniforms. Hulking beasts accompanied them, creatures far larger than any wolf or bear Ghalen has ever seen or read about. He knew the Elgaric were said to train animals for all manner of tasks, but these were nothing like the beasts of burden he had imagined. Towering and draped in thick muscle, they looked bred for war, not for hauling lumber or guarding flocks. Some wore spiked collars. They stirred a primal urge in Ghalen to flee. The bearded soldiers advanced in step with their beasts, wielding either dual battle axes or a single axe paired with a shield. Begrim rode up to Ghalen amid the chaos.
"Get your horse and ride for the capital. This is no longer a place for learning, Ghalen. I will not risk your life for a lesson."
Ghalen wanted to be brave like his brothers, to argue with his father, to say he could help, but fear held his tongue. The king stood before his assembled troops, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of faces in front of him. Each face was etched in a complex mix of fear, determination, and hope. He closed his eyes, steeling himself. Then, drawing his sword and holding it aloft, he shouted,
"Soldiers of the Isle, today we stand on the precipice of history. It is not just our survival that hangs in the balance, but the very peace our ancestors bled for. Let them hear the thunder of our unity. Let them feel the tremors of our resolve. For our homes, our kin, and all that we hold dear."
His voice rang out like a battle cry, reverberating across the camp. The men erupted into cheers, their chants growing louder as those nearest the king relayed his words to those further away. As the soldiers rallied, Galen's sharp eyes caught movement at the edges of the Elgaric lines. Strange hooded figures emerged, their faces obscured in shadow. They moved with purpose, surrounded by heavily armored warriors clad in dark, menacing metal. Unlike anything Ghalen had seen in his books. A chill ran down his spine as he realized these figures were orchestrating the enemy forces. Something else was off. There were so many of them, and they did not stop coming. Ghalen glanced at the Lord Marshal, who appeared just as surprised by the sight. The enemy advanced, and Galen's heart pounded in his chest. Then, amidst the chaos, he spotted his 2 brothers shouting orders from their mounts. They sat tall in their saddles, commanding and fearless. And, for a moment, a swell of pride surged through him. His father's voice cut through the cacophony of the battlefield, sharp and resolute.
"Charge!"
For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, a collective inhalation of 1,000 men. Then, with a thunderous roar, the army surged forward. The ground trembled under the pounding hooves of 1,000 horses, a rumbling drumbeat that reverberated in Galen's very bones. He felt the raw, unrelenting power of the charge, each stride driving them closer to the enemy. Galen's eyes stayed fixed on the advancing lines, the gap between them closing with a terrifying inevitability. his heart hammering against his ribs, every beat a countdown to the moment of impact. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging into eternity. Sounds around him sharpened. The rasp of his own ragged breathing mingled with the thundering hooves and the rising crescendo of war cries. Then they collided. Steel sang against steel, a deafening symphony of violence that drowned out all else. Horses, maddened and riderless, careened wildly across the battlefield, leaving trails of red in their wake. One guard assigned to Ghalen seized his shoulder and yanked hard. "We need to leave, my prince," he urged. But Ghalen couldn't tear his gaze away. His wide eyes remained fixed on the chaos before him, unable to look away from the carnage unfolding in the blood-soaked field. He saw a lieutenant fall, an axe buried in his back, his lifeless body crumbling to the ground. Then, Galen's gaze shifted to the grass beneath his father's horse, watching in horror as it withered and blackened. One of the hooded figures knelt nearby, chanting with a palm pressed to the frozen earth. Begrim's horse reared violently, throwing him from the saddle.
"Father!"
Ghalen cried, his voice raw with panic. His attention wavered, drawn to another hooded figure plunging a blade into the chest of a fallen officer. Galen's breath hitched as the soldier's lifeless body jerked, rising to its feet, eyes glowing with an eerie blue fire. But Galen's focus snapped back to his father. Someone was approaching him. A towering figure. A nightmare in black iron. Begrim, moving sluggishly, hauled himself to his feet. Sword in hand, he prepared to defend himself. Steel met steel in a ferocious clash. Each strike rang out like a desperate prayer. Each parry, a defiance against the inevitable. Ghalen could see his father's strength waning with every blow, his movements slower, his defenses faltering. There was a sudden slash, and blood flowed. Galen's father faltered, his strength leaving him as he fell to the ground. The man, or creature in black iron, loomed over him for a moment, then turned away, leaving him to his fate. Tears blurred Galen's vision as he struggled to comprehend what he had just seen. Shapes swam into focus, his brothers screaming in rage and despair as they stormed toward the battlefield. Behind them, the Lord Marshal's voice rang out, desperate and strained.
"We must retreat! The battle is lost!"
But his brothers didn't listen. They charged headfirst into the chaos, their war cry swallowed by the roar of battle. Ghalen had no time to react before his guards seized him, hauling him away in the opposite direction. He fought against their grip, his heart splintering as he was dragged farther from the field and the family he couldn't save.